The kitchen was filled with the scent of cinnamon rolls and the low hum of the dishwasher when Stephen Brooks heard the front door swing open and the sound of his son-in-law's voice echo down the hall. Greg was always loud, always brimming with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, but this morning he seemed especially pleased with himself. "Stephen," he called, striding into the kitchen with a grin that made Stephen's stomach tighten. "Big news. My entire family is coming for Christmas, just 35 people." He said it like a challenge, as if daring Stephen to protest, to panic, to beg for mercy. But Stephen just smiled, set down his coffee, and replied, "Perfect. I'm leaving for a luxury vacation. You can cook and clean, this isn't my job." Greg laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Stephen's eyes didn't waver. "I'm serious, Greg. I've hosted every holiday for the last 10 years. This year, you get to see what it's like." Greg's laughter faltered, but he quickly recovered, clapping Stephen on the back. "You're a riot, old man. Don't worry, we'll handle it." If you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Stephen watched as Greg boasted to Lisa, his daughter, and the rest of the family, telling them how he'd take care of everything and how Christmas would be legendary. Lisa tried to hide her concern, but Stephen caught her eye and gave her a reassuring nod. He'd made up his mind. This year, he was done being the family servant. As the days ticked by, Stephen quietly booked his flights, reserved a suite at a 5-star resort, and arranged for a trusted house-sitter to keep an eye on things. He left detailed instructions for Greg, a grocery list, a cleaning schedule, and a note that read, "Good luck." Greg still thought it was a bluff, but Stephen was already packing his bags, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Minnie Hook, on Christmas Eve, Stephen loaded his suitcase into the car, left a note on the fridge, and drove to the airport. Greg's jaw dropped as he realized Stephen was serious. "You're really leaving?" Stephen just smiled. "Merry Christmas, Greg. Enjoy your family." As he boarded the plane, Stephen felt a surge of freedom, the weight of years of unappreciated effort finally lifting from his shoulders. He watched the city shrink below him, the lights twinkling like a promise of something better. Meanwhile, back at the house, Greg's confidence began to crack as the first wave of relatives arrived, kids running wild, adults demanding food and attention, the kitchen already a disaster. Lisa, caught in the middle, watched as her husband's bravado faded, replaced by panic as he realized just how much work went into hosting a holiday for 35 people. Minnie Hook, as Stephen sipped champagne in his hotel suite, he smiled at the thought of Greg scrambling to keep up, the chaos he'd left behind, a fitting lesson for a man who had never truly understood the meaning of family. The real surprise, Stephen knew, was still to come. The bills, the mess, the reckoning, Greg had no idea what was waiting for him. And for the first time in years, Stephen was looking forward to Christmas. The first sign that Greg was in over his head came before the sun had even risen on Christmas morning. The house, usually so calm under Stephen's watchful eye, was already a war zone. Greg's relatives arrived in waves, children shrieking as they tore through the living room, aunts and uncles arguing over who got the best guest room, and cousins demanding Wi-Fi passwords and snacks. The kitchen was a disaster, flour dusting every surface, pots boiling over, and the oven beeping with a turkey that was already starting to burn. Lisa tried to help, but every time she offered a suggestion, Greg snapped at her, his patience fraying with every new demand. "Where's the gravy?" someone shouted from the dining room. "Why isn't the table set?" another voice called. Greg ran from room to room, sweat beading on his forehead, his once confident smile now a grimace. Minnie Hook, by noon, the complaints had started. "This isn't how Stephen did it," one of the older relatives muttered, eyeing the lumpy mashed potatoes. At least he knew how to keep the kids entertained, another chimed in, watching as a group of toddlers smeared cranberry sauce on the walls. Greg tried to laugh it off, but the cracks were showing. The dishwasher broke, the garbage piled up, and the family dog escaped into the backyard, chased by a pack of screaming children. Lisa found Greg in the garage, his head in his hands. "I can't do this," he whispered. "I thought it would be easy. I thought your dad was just making a fuss all these years." Lisa put a hand on his shoulder, her voice gentle but firm. "Dad made it look easy because he cared. He did it for us, not for show." Greg looked at her, the realization dawning in his eyes. "I never appreciated him. I thought it was his job." Minnie Hook, meanwhile, Stephen lounged by the pool at his resort, sipping a cold drink and reading a novel, the sound of the ocean a soothing backdrop to his thoughts. He checked his phone, saw a dozen missed calls from Lisa and Greg, and smiled. He knew the lesson was sinking in. The real surprise, though, was still to come. That afternoon, the house sitter delivered the first stack of bills, groceries, utilities, cleaning services, and a note from Stephen, "You wanted to host. You pay the price." Greg's face went white as he realized the true cost of his arrogance. The family, once united by tradition, was now divided by frustration and blame. Minnie Hook, as the sun set on a Christmas unlike any other, Greg sat alone in the kitchen, the house a mess, his relatives grumbling, and his pride in tatters. Lisa sat beside him, her voice soft. "Maybe next year, we do things differently." Greg nodded, the lesson finally learned. Across the world, Stephen raised a glass to the future, grateful for the peace he'd found in standing up for himself, and for the family he refused to let be destroyed by entitlement. The days after Christmas were a blur of complaints, dirty dishes, and mounting bills. Greg's relatives, who had arrived with high expectations and empty hands, now grumbled about everything: the cold guest rooms, the bland food, the lack of entertainment. The house, once a place of holiday magic under Stephen's care, now felt like a hotel that had lost its only good manager. Greg tried to keep up, but every new problem seemed to multiply. The heating bill arrived, triple what he expected. The grocery receipts stacked up, each one a reminder of how much Stephen had quietly covered in years past. The cleaning service called to say they'd need extra hours to deal with the mess, and the house sitter texted a photo of the overflowing trash cans, asking if Greg wanted to pay for a special pickup. Minnie Hook, Lisa watched her husband's confidence crumble, her own patience wearing thin. "You said you could handle it," she reminded him one night as they sat in the kitchen, the table littered with takeout containers and unpaid invoices. Greg's shoulders slumped. "I thought it would be fun. I thought your dad was just being dramatic." Lisa shook her head, her voice soft but firm. "Dad did it all because he loved us. He never complained. He just made it work." Greg stared at the bills, the reality of his arrogance settling in. "I never thanked him. Not once." Meanwhile, word of Stephen's absence spread through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once envied the Brooks' big family gatherings now whispered about the chaos, the noise, the parade of relatives who seemed to take more than they gave. The local bakery owner, who had always set aside extra pies for Stephen, asked Lisa, "Is your dad okay? We miss seeing him." Lisa smiled, her heart aching with regret. "He's better than ever. He's finally taking care of himself." Minnie Hook, across the world, Stephen lounged on a sun-drenched balcony, watching the waves crash against the shore. He checked his phone, saw another round of missed calls from Greg, and let them go unanswered. He spent his days exploring new cities, trying new foods, and rediscovering the joy of living for himself. Each night, he wrote a postcard to Lisa, sharing stories of his adventures and reminding her that sometimes, the best way to teach a lesson is to step back and let others learn it the hard way. Minnie Hook, back at home, Greg's family began to leave, one by one, their goodbyes curt, their complaints lingering in the air. The house grew quiet, the mess left behind a testament to the cost of entitlement. Greg sat alone in the living room, the bills piled high, his pride finally broken. Lisa joined him, her voice gentle. "Maybe next year, we ask Dad to come home." Greg nodded, the lesson finally learned. The legend of Stephen's absence had become a story the family would never forget, a story of respect, humility, and the true meaning of Christmas. Stephen's return from his luxury vacation was nothing like the homecomings of years past. There was no crowd at the airport, no excited grandchildren waiting with handmade signs, no Lisa bustling in the kitchen to welcome him back. Instead, he stepped into his own house to find it eerily quiet, the air heavy with the scent of stale leftovers and the faint trace of cleaning products. The living room was spotless, but the energy was different, less like a home, more like a hotel after the guests have checked out. Greg was the first to greet him, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed by exhaustion and something like shame. "Welcome back, Stephen," he said, his voice subdued. "I hope you had a good trip." Stephen smiled, setting his suitcase down and hanging his coat with deliberate care. "It was perfect, Greg. I needed the break." He glanced around, noting the stack of bills on the counter, the empty fridge, the silence that seemed to press in from every corner. Lisa appeared, her expression a mix of relief and regret. "Dad, I'm sorry. We made a mess of things." Stephen hugged her, his voice gentle. "You learned something, though, didn't you?" Lisa nodded, tears in her eyes. "We did. We really did." Minnie Hook, that evening, the family gathered for dinner, just the four of them, the table smaller but the conversation more honest than it had been in years. Greg tried to apologize, stumbling over his words. "I thought I could handle it. I thought you were just making a fuss all those years. But I was wrong. I never realized how much you did for us." Stephen listened, his anger softened by the sincerity in Greg's voice. "It's not about the work, Greg. It's about respect. About seeing the people who hold things together, even when it's not glamorous." Greg nodded, his pride finally broken. "I'm sorry, Stephen. I really am." Minnie Hook, as the night wore on, the conversation turned to the future. Lisa suggested a new tradition, smaller gatherings, shared responsibilities, and a promise to never take each other for granted again. Stephen agreed, his heart full. "Next year, we do things differently. We do them together." The family laughed, the tension easing, the wounds of the past beginning to heal. Minnie Hook, later, as Stephen sat by the fire, sipping a cup of tea, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The revenge he'd set in motion had forced Greg and Lisa to face the truth about themselves, about family, and about the cost of entitlement. The real victory, Stephen realized, was not in the chaos he'd left behind, but in the lesson learned, the power of stepping back, of letting others fail, and of reclaiming his own dignity. The next Christmas would be different, but for the first time in years, Stephen was looking forward to it, not as a servant, but as the respected head of the family. The months after Stephen's return were a season of slow healing and new beginnings. The house, once echoing with chaos and complaint, now pulsed with a quieter energy, meals shared around a smaller table, chores divided without argument, and laughter that felt genuine, not forced. Greg worked hard to regain Stephen's trust, taking on more responsibility around the house and at work, his pride tempered by the memory of his failed Christmas. Lisa, too, found her voice, insisting on boundaries and respect, her relationship with her father stronger than it had been in years. Minnie Hook, as December approached, the family agreed to keep Christmas small, just the four of them, a simple meal, and a promise to focus on what mattered. But a week before the holiday, an unexpected guest arrived. Stephen opened the door to find Greg's mother, Evelyn, standing on the porch, her suitcase in hand and her eyes full of regret. "I heard what happened last year," she said quietly. "I want to help. I want to make things right." The family welcomed her in, unsure at first, but Evelyn quickly proved herself, cooking, cleaning, and sharing stories of her own mistakes and lessons learned. She apologized to Stephen for the years of judgment and distance, her words sincere. "I never realized how much you did for this family. I'm sorry for the way I treated you." Stephen nodded, his forgiveness genuine. "We all have things to learn, Evelyn. I'm glad you're here." Minnie Hook, the days leading up to Christmas were filled with a new sense of unity. Evelyn and Lisa baked cookies with Lily, Greg and Stephen repaired the old fence together, and the house was filled with the scent of pine and the sound of music. On Christmas Eve, the family gathered around the fire, exchanging small gifts and heartfelt letters instead of expensive presents. Evelyn read a letter aloud, her voice trembling. "I promise to never take this family for granted again. I promise to listen, to help, and to love without judgment." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a blessing. Minnie Hook, as the night wore on, Stephen realized that the true revenge was not in Greg's suffering, but in the family's survival, their ability to forgive, to rebuild, and to find joy in the aftermath of betrayal. The pain of the past would never fully disappear, but it no longer defined them. Instead, they chose to remember the lessons learned, that dignity is worth fighting for, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, and that the truest legacy is the family you build, the lives you touch, and the courage to hope. The journey was not over, but for the first time, Stephen believed they were finally on the right path. Christmas morning dawned with a gentle hush, the world outside blanketed in fresh snow, the house warm with the scent of cinnamon and pine. Stephen woke early, savoring the quiet before the day began, and watched the sun rise over the fields from his favorite chair by the window. For the first time in years, he felt no dread, no exhaustion, just a quiet anticipation for what the day might bring. Downstairs, Lisa and Evelyn were already in the kitchen, their laughter mingling with the clatter of pans as they prepared a simple breakfast. Greg joined them, his face relaxed, his movements unhurried, a far cry from the frantic host of last year. Lily bounced down the stairs, her eyes bright with excitement, and hugged Stephen tightly. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," she whispered, her voice full of hope. Minnie Hook, after breakfast, the family gathered in the living room, the tree twinkling with handmade ornaments and a few carefully chosen gifts beneath its branches. Instead of the usual frenzy of unwrapping, Stephen handed out envelopes, one for each family member. "This year, I wanted to do something different," he said, his voice steady. "Inside each envelope is a letter, a promise, a memory, or a wish for the future." Lisa opened hers first, tears filling her eyes as she read Stephen's words of gratitude for her strength and kindness. Greg's letter was an apology and a challenge. "You proved you could change, Greg. Now keep proving it, every day." Evelyn's was a welcome home, and Lily's was a story about the first Christmas Stephen spent with her grandmother, a reminder that love endures even after loss. Minnie Hook, the family took turns reading their letters aloud, the room filling with laughter, tears, and the kind of honesty that only comes after surviving the worst together. When it was Greg's turn, he stood, his voice trembling. "I never understood what it meant to be part of a family until I almost lost mine. Thank you for giving me a second chance." The room was silent, the weight of his words settling over them like a blessing. Stephen smiled, his heart full. The greatest gifts aren't bought. They're earned, through love, respect, and the courage to start again. Minnie Hook, as the day unfolded, the family played games, shared stories, and took a long walk through the snowy fields. The pain of the past lingered, but it no longer defined them. Instead, they chose to remember the lessons learned, that dignity is worth fighting for, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, and that the truest legacy is the family you build, the lives you touch, and the hope you carry forward. That night, as Stephen sat by the fire, Lily curled up beside him, he realized that the real revenge was not in Greg's suffering, but in the family's survival, their ability to forgive, to rebuild, and to find joy in the aftermath of betrayal. The journey was not over, but for the first time, Stephen believed they were finally home. Spring arrived with a rush of green and gold, the farm bursting with new life as Stephen and his family settled into a rhythm that felt both hard-won and deeply right. The pain of the past lingered, but it was now a thread in the tapestry of their lives, not the whole story. Greg worked the land with a humility that surprised everyone, his hands calloused, his laughter softer, his gratitude for second chances evident in every gesture. Lisa found her voice as a leader in the community, organizing food drives and helping neighbors in need. Evelyn became a fixture in the kitchen, her stories and recipes binding the family together in ways that money never could. Lily thrived, her confidence blooming as she watched the adults around her learn, stumble, and grow. Minnie Hook, but as the days grew longer and the fields filled with promise, a new challenge emerged. The local school was in danger of closing, the result of years of budget cuts and declining enrollment. The community was divided, some wanted to let it go, others fought to save it, but no one could agree on a plan. Stephen saw the fear in Lisa's eyes, the worry in Greg's, and knew that the family's next test would not be about survival, but about legacy. "We can't let this place die," Lisa said one night, her voice trembling. "It's where Lily learned to read, where we met our friends, where this family found its footing again." Greg nodded, his resolve clear. "We'll do whatever it takes, Stephen. We owe it to the kids, and to ourselves." Minnie Hook, Stephen called a family meeting, the kitchen filled with the scent of bread and the sound of rain on the roof. "Legacy isn't just about what you leave behind," he said, his voice steady. "It's about what you fight for, what you build, and the hope you inspire in others." The family agreed to lead the charge, organizing fundraisers, rallying neighbors, and working late into the night to save the school. The effort was exhausting, the setbacks many, but the family's unity never wavered. As the weeks passed, the community rallied around them, inspired by their determination and the lessons they'd learned from Stephen's quiet strength. Minnie Hook, the night before the final vote, the family gathered under the old oak tree, reading letters from the box and sharing stories of the battles they'd fought and the victories they'd won. "No matter what happens tomorrow," Stephen said, his heart full, "we did this together. And that's what matters." The next day, the school was saved by a single vote, the community erupting in cheers and tears. The family's legacy was secure, not just in land or money, but in the lives they'd touched, the hope they'd inspired, and the courage they'd shown. As the sun set over the fields, Stephen realized that the greatest revenge was not in payback, but in living well, loving deeply, and leaving the world better than he'd found it. The victory at the school brought a new sense of pride and unity to the Brooks family, the farm now a symbol of what could be accomplished when people stood together. The days were filled with laughter, hard work, and the kind of hope that only comes from overcoming real adversity. Stephen found himself busier than ever, mentoring young farmers, helping Lily with her science project, and sharing quiet evenings with Lisa and Greg, their conversations deeper and more honest than he'd ever imagined possible. But just as the family began to settle into this new chapter, an unexpected letter arrived, its envelope thick and the handwriting unfamiliar. Lisa found it in the mailbox and brought it to Stephen, her brow furrowed. "It's addressed to you, Dad. From someone named Samuel Brooks." Stephen's heart skipped. He hadn't heard that name in decades, his estranged brother, the one who'd left home after a bitter fight over the farm, the one who'd sworn never to return. Minnie Hook, the family gathered in the living room as Stephen opened the letter, his hands trembling. Samuel's words were raw, full of regret and longing. "I've watched from afar as you rebuilt what I helped break. I see now that I was wrong, that pride and anger blinded me to what really mattered. I want to come home, if you'll have me. I want to meet my niece and nephew, to see the land one more time before it's too late." The room was silent as Stephen finished reading, the weight of old wounds and new possibilities settling over them. Greg was the first to speak, his voice gentle. "You always said family was about second chances, Stephen. Maybe it's time to give your brother one." Lisa nodded, her eyes shining with hope. "We've all made mistakes. If we can forgive each other, maybe we can forgive him too." Minnie Hook. That night, Stephen sat on the porch, the letter in his lap, the stars bright above. He thought of the years lost to anger, the pain of watching his family fracture, the lessons he'd learned about pride, forgiveness, and the quiet strength it took to start again. He realized that the true legacy he wanted to leave was not just in the land or the traditions, but in the courage to open his heart, even after it had been broken. The next morning, he wrote a reply to Samuel, inviting him to visit for the Harvest Festival. "Come home," he wrote. "There's still a place for you here." Minnie Hook. As the family prepared for Samuel's arrival, the air was thick with anticipation and a little fear. Would old wounds reopen, or would forgiveness finally win? Stephen knew only one thing for sure: the journey was not over, and the greatest revenge was not in holding on to pain, but in proving that love, hope, and family could survive anything. The day Samuel Brooks returned to the farm was one of those rare autumn afternoons when the air is crisp, the sky impossibly blue, and every leaf seems to glow with its own light. Stephen stood at the gate, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope, watching as a dusty pickup truck pulled into the drive. Samuel stepped out, older and thinner than Stephen remembered, his hair gone gray, his eyes wary but full of longing. For a moment, neither brother spoke, the years of silence stretching between them like a chasm. Then Samuel broke the tension with a hesitant smile. "You look good, Stephen. The farm looks even better." Stephen nodded, his voice thick. "It's been a long road, Sam. But we made it." The family gathered on the porch, their curiosity and anxiety barely hidden. Lisa introduced Samuel to Lily and Mark, her voice gentle, her eyes searching for signs of the man she'd heard about but never really known. Greg shook Samuel's hand, his grip firm, his respect for Stephen evident in the way he stood by his side. Minnie Hook. The first hours were awkward, filled with small talk and careful questions, but as the sun dipped lower, the old rhythms began to return. Samuel walked the fields with Stephen, his voice soft as he apologized for the past. "I was wrong, brother. I let pride and anger drive me away. I missed so much, your wedding, the kids growing up, Mom and Dad's last days. I can't change any of that, but I want to try to make things right." Stephen listened, his own regrets surfacing. "We both made mistakes, Sam. But you're here now. That's what matters." The family gathered for dinner, the table crowded with food and laughter, the old wounds slowly giving way to new memories. Samuel told stories of his travels, his failures, and the lessons he'd learned about forgiveness and starting over. Lisa and Mark listened, their skepticism fading as they saw the sincerity in his eyes. Lily, ever the peacemaker, drew a picture of the whole family together, her hope for the future clear in every line. Minnie Hook. As the night wore on, Stephen realized that the true test of forgiveness was not in forgetting the past, but in choosing to move forward together. He watched as Samuel helped clear the table, his hand steady, his gratitude obvious. The pain of old betrayals lingered, but it no longer defined them. Instead, they chose to remember the lessons learned, that dignity is worth fighting for, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, and that the truest legacy is the family you build, the lives you touch, and the courage to hope. Minnie Hook. As the family sat around the fire, sharing stories and dreams, Stephen looked at Samuel and saw not the brother who had left, but the man who had found his way home. The journey was almost over, but the promise of tomorrow was brighter than ever. The week of the Harvest Festival arrived with a flurry of activity, the farm buzzing with preparations as neighbors and friends pitched in to help. Stephen watched with a quiet pride as Samuel took charge of the hayrides, his laughter echoing across the fields as he taught the children how to stack pumpkins and drive the old tractor. Lisa and Emily organized the bake sale, their rivalry replaced by a camaraderie that made even the hardest work feel light. Greg and Mark built a bonfire pit, their easy banter a sign that the old wounds were finally healing. The air was thick with the scent of apple cider and wood smoke, the trees ablaze with color, and for the first time in years, the farm felt like the heart of the community again. Minnie Hook, but beneath the surface, Stephen felt the tension of a final test. Would Samuel truly belong, or would the ghosts of the past return to haunt them all? The festival began with a parade of tractors and floats, the children waving from the wagons, their faces painted with hope. Samuel stood beside Stephen at the entrance, greeting guests with a humility that surprised everyone. "I never thought I'd be back here," he admitted, his voice low. "I never thought I'd be welcome." Stephen clapped him on the back, his own voice thick with emotion. "You earned your place, Sam. You came home." As the sun set and the bonfire roared to life, the family gathered for the first reading of the new letters, a tradition that had become the soul of the farm. Each member shared their hopes, regrets, and promises for the future. Samuel's letter was the most moving of all. "I spent years running from my mistakes. But this family, this land, gave me a second chance. I promised to honor it, to protect it, and to never let pride come between us again." The crowd applauded, the firelight flickering on faces wet with tears and shining with pride. Minnie Hook, as the festival drew to a close, Stephen realized that the greatest revenge was not in holding on to pain, but in proving that love, forgiveness, and hope could survive anything. The farm, once a battleground, was now a beacon, a place where anyone willing to do the work could find a home. The journey was almost over, but the promise of tomorrow was brighter than ever. As the last guests drifted home and the family gathered around the dying fire, Stephen looked at Samuel, Lisa, Greg, Mark, and the children, his heart full. "We did it," he said softly. "We really did." The family raised their glasses, the toast echoing through the night. "To the Brooks legacy, may it endure for generations to come." As the first snow of winter dusted the fields, the Brooks family settled into a new rhythm, the farm alive with the quiet joys of the season, crackling fires, shared meals, and the laughter of children sledding down the old hill. But beneath the peace, Stephen sensed a final challenge brewing, the kind that tests not just the strength of a family, but the lessons they've learned along the way. It came in the form of a letter from the bank, a long-forgotten loan, taken out by Samuel years ago in a moment of desperation, was coming due. The sum was large enough to threaten the farm's future, and the deadline was just weeks away. Samuel was devastated, his old shame returning with a vengeance. "I thought I'd paid it all back," he confessed, his voice shaking. "I never wanted my mistakes to hurt you again." The family gathered in the kitchen, the air thick with worry and the scent of cinnamon bread. Lisa and Emily argued about how to raise the money, Mark offered to sell his truck, and Greg suggested taking out another loan. But Stephen shook his head, his voice calm and steady. "We don't run from our problems. We face them together." Minnie Hook, the family spent days brainstorming, reaching out to neighbors, and organizing a winter market to raise funds. They sold homemade crafts, baked goods, and even offered sleigh rides through the snowy fields. The community rallied around them, drawn by the story of a family that had survived so much and refused to give up. Samuel worked harder than anyone, his determination to make things right inspiring everyone around him. As the deadline approached, the family gathered the last of the money, still short by a few $1,000s. That night, Stephen sat by the fire, the box of letters in his lap, and made a decision. He took out the deed to the farm, the one thing he'd always sworn to protect, and called a family meeting. "This land is our legacy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But it's not worth more than the people who make it home. If we have to sell a piece of it to save the rest, then that's what we'll do." The family protested, but Stephen was resolute. "We've come too far to let pride destroy us now." Minnie Hook. The next morning, a neighbor arrived with a check, enough to cover the shortfall. "You helped me when I lost my wife," she said, her eyes shining. "Now it's my turn." The family wept with relief, their gratitude overflowing. The loan was paid, the farm saved, and the lesson clear: the greatest legacy is not in what you keep, but in what you give. As the snow fell outside and the family gathered for dinner, Stephen realized that the true revenge was not in payback, but in the hope, courage, and love that would carry them through whatever storms lay ahead. The final morning of winter arrived with a hush, the sky painted in soft gold and lavender as Stephen Brooks stepped out onto the porch, a mug of coffee warming his hands. The farm was quiet, the fields glistening with frost, the air alive with the promise of a new day. He watched as the sun crested the horizon, bathing the land in light, and felt a peace settle over him, a peace hard-won, forged in the fires of betrayal, forgiveness, and the slow, steady work of rebuilding. Inside, the house was waking up, the smell of bread baking, the laughter of grandchildren, the low murmur of his children planning the day's work. Lauren, now a part of the family again, moved through the kitchen with a grace that came from humility and hard lessons learned. Brian and Mark loaded tools into the truck, their easy banter a sign that old wounds had finally healed. Anna and Sarah sat at the table, writing new letters for the box Stephen had started, a tradition that had become the heart of the family, a way to pass on the lessons of hope, courage, and love to the next generation. Minnie Hook. As the family gathered for breakfast, Stephen stood at the head of the table, his heart full. "We've been through storms," he said, his voice steady. "But we've come out stronger. This farm, this family, is my legacy, but it's also yours. Promise me you'll keep building, keep forgiving, keep hoping, no matter what comes." The family nodded, their eyes shining with tears and pride. After breakfast, they walked together to the old oak tree, where Stephen buried the new letters beneath its roots, the earth soft and rich. "This is for the future," he said. "So that when you're lost, you'll remember where you came from, and who you are." The children helped cover the box, their laughter ringing out as they chased each other through the grass. The day unfolded in a blur of work and joy, fields to tend, fences to mend, stories to share. As the sun set, the family gathered on the porch, the sky ablaze with color, the air filled with the scent of honeysuckle and the sound of cicadas. Stephen sat in his old rocking chair, Lauren beside him, Brian and Mark on the steps, Anna and Sarah with the children in their laps. They watched the stars appear, one by one, the world growing quiet and still. Minnie Hook. Stephen closed his eyes, grateful for the journey, for the family he'd fought for the lessons learned and the love that had endured. He knew that the pain of the past would never fully disappear, but it no longer defined them. Instead, they chose to remember the hope, the courage, and the forgiveness that had carried them through. As the night deepened and the farm settled into peace, Stephen whispered a promise to the stars: "Whatever tomorrow brings, we'll face it together." The Brooks legacy would endure, not just in land or money, but in the hearts of those who had learned to love, to forgive, and to begin again.